standing here with Rabble, and we were talking about recruiting and hiring horror stories, and your eyes lit up. So tell me what's on your mind, man.
So I started doing Ruby on Rails development in 2004.
All right.
And really early on, just about the time that Ruby on Rails got a blog, there was a post saying, looking for a Rails developer in San Francisco. And at the time, turned out I was the only Rails developer in San Francisco.
Wow.
And this was ended up being Odeo.
Okay.
Which is a podcasting company, which became Twitter. And when I first got the contract, there was just no one around, and so they were looking at doing a remote programmer or whether or not they could find a developer to build a project.
So Odeo was built on Rails. Okay.
Odeo was built on Rails,
All right.
and at the time it was a very kind of cutting edge technology.
Oh yeah, no, I remember. I was at a competitor actually.
It was Rails 0.86, I think.
Okay.
was a production environment for a very long time.
All right.
And we met in a cafe and we worked out of people's apartments and cafes for 6 months until we actually got an office.
And so the horror part of this experience, the nightmare
The horror part of the experience was DHH was going around trying to personally recruit for Evan Williams to find a developer. A single developer in the Bay Area.
And there was no Twitter. That was probably how he came up with Twitter. He was like, man, I need to connect with people faster.
There was no Twitter, there was nothing else. It was just like, he posted on the blog and it's like, anybody in San Francisco, no Rails.
Anyone. Is there anyone? Hello, Rails developers. And now you can't, you could swing a dead cat around and hit 50 Rails developers in any Starbucks, right?
Yeah.
So, so are you actively recruiting today or networking with people in terms of finding the right people? Do you have any other things that you've seen happen since then to now? I mean, you've probably either been hired or...
Well, I've been hired a bunch of places. I spent a while working at Yahoo doing Rails development for Yahoo. And for the last couple years, I've been down in Uruguay in South America running a consulting shop.
Okay.
And so there we have a hard time hiring too.
Really?
And what we do is we actually...
Wait, is it the same as San Francisco? There's no Rails developers in Uruguay?
There's some Rails developers who do consulting, and there's 4 shops that do Rails development.
Wow.
But there's a lot of developers who are experienced that don't know Rails.
Yeah.
So we do 2-week intensive trainings, and we're organizing a Ruby conference for October.
Cool.
And we're trying to sort of draw people in from other communities.
I gotcha, because, I mean, basically the U.S. is ahead in terms of Rails developers. And then, I mean, what I've seen before is Europe, the leading countries, the leading economies basically will probably have the leading developers, but Uruguay starts to get down a little bit, so your need for finding the right talent is bigger. Yeah, look at you. What do you want to say? Oh, now that the mic's in your phone. No, are you getting that? Okay, so
we've got some great developers. Santiago Pastorino is there.
All right.
He's been doing a ton of contributions to Rails core. He does a dozen patches a week.
Yeah.
And so we've got a small, solid community. So our question now is how do we expand that community?
Yeah, that's awesome.
And to get more people.
So if you don't mind me flipping back to Odeo for a second, so you came on board as an early Rails guy there.
Yeah.
Hopefully you had a good exit. I always like hearing people have a good exit.
Not as much as I'd like.
Okay, of course. That's always the answer.
What happened was the venture capitalists decided that Odeo and Twitter were a bad idea.
Right.
And they basically shut everything down. And Evan Williams used his personal fortune from selling Blogger. And he basically had to buy back the stock because the venture capitalist said, this Twitter Odeo thing, none of this is going to be worth anything.
Who was the VC? I'm curious.
Charles River.
Wow.
Yeah, he sort of ranks really high up there in the mistakes of
Charles River. You didn't believe in Twitter. Wow.
Yeah, they walked away from 35% ownership.
I mean, I've made some mistakes, but that one's They
didn't have to do it. All they could have said was just keep going.
Yeah. And they probably didn't need that much money. They were doing Rails. They probably had how big was the development team there in Odeo?
5 people.
Yeah. So these guys were sitting on millions of dollars, and they didn't want to put $500,000 on Evan Williams, who had already done Blogger and sold it to Google. Okay.
I mean, they put the money originally in, but they didn't want to keep it there.
Wow. All right. Well, good for Evan Williams. By the way, he has the same name. Obviously, you know him really well. I've never met him. I've met Matt, Photo Matt, but it has the same name as a bottle of bourbon whiskey, right?
Yeah, and often the whiskey was in the office.
So he keeps a bottle of it at the desk?
Not at the desk, but in the kitchen.
In the kitchen, nice. And do you want to say something else? Say goodbye? Say goodbye. Say Ruby. All right, I think we're good.
Cool.
So nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Thank you.